I thought I'd go ahead and make an additional video to talk about LODs. When you hear the term LODs, or level of detail, what this means is that you have a series of meshes that are identical in shape and color, but have a different number of polygons. And that polygon count affects the speed that things will render, either for a film or for a game. The basic premise is that you have these identical objects, and as the camera gets farther away from that object, you switch out the objects for the lower resolution objects. And when the camera gets closer, you switch out the objects for the higher resolution objects. Now, if it's not making sense to you, don't worry. By the end of the video, you'll know exactly what we're talking about. So if you're going to make a series of LODs and switch out these meshes, one of the big questions always is, well, how many polygons do I use? Now, the answer is what's best for your project. If you're doing a feature film that's going to be shown on widescreen in theaters, obviously you're going to need more detail, you're going to need more polygons. If you're doing a YouTube video, then probably a lot less. And if you're doing a video game, of course, you're going to need somewhere in the middle. This is truly a matter of testing, experience, and practice. Everyone has their opinions on this, and at the end of the day, it's up to you to decide how many LODs you need and how many polygons they should have in a given situation. But in order to actually experiment with LODs, I need to show you how to properly export them. Here we are back in Bridge, and we're just going to take a look at the settings of the object we used in the last video. You can see that it's highlighted in blue. Now let's go to the lower right and click on this gear and go to Export Settings. Here we have access to all our settings. In the previous video, we set the textures to export to Bridge's default. Now, depending on your project or your client, you may need to check additional textures, and that's done here when you export a 3D object. But for now, let's actually just look at the model settings where the LODs are kept. Now, besides the high poly source that's here, you can also set which LODs you can export. Now notice that they have a number of triangles showing. If I select a different object, you'll see different triangle counts. This is because each object was scanned with different equipment at a different time, and they may or may not have certain levels of detail. If we look at this list of LODs, you can see that LOD 0 is always the highest triangle count, or the highest polygon count. And LOD 5 has the lowest triangle or polygon count. When exporting, though, we can choose any of these LODs that we wish to use. We don't have to always use LOD 0. If we started with a higher LOD number, Unity would still consider that the starting point of arranging the level of details. When Quixel makes these objects, they have to assume that you could possibly be making a film. So typically LOD 0 is way too high for the Unity game engine. For an example, if I was actually going to use this in a Unity game, I would probably set this to LOD 2, 3, and 4, maybe possibly LOD 5, and then export that. Of course, I would actually export this into the game and test it, and I might have to go back and re-export if the settings weren't correct. Let's say that you've tried all the LODs and none of them seem to fit your specific need, your specific situation. You can always go to the high poly source at the top of the list here and export that out to your favorite 3D application and make your own LODs. Making your own LODs is beyond the scope of this introductory video, but I will make a recommendation at the end of the video for some software to make your life a little easier if you choose to do so. Here we are back in the scene we made in the last video, and I want to explain what's going on with the LOD object a little bit. We're going to go ahead and select this object, and you can see now that it's saying LOD 0 in the scene view. If I go here and expand this object in the hierarchy window, you can actually see all the LOD meshes. They're also, of course, in the models folder in the project window. When Quixel exports these, you can see it exports the folder with the name of the object on it, which can be quite long. And inside of that is a subdirectory with all the models for the LOD. Now, if we look in the scene view and zoom in and out, you'll actually see the LOD value at the bottom of the screen changing. It's switching from 0 to 1 to 2. When we see these LOD transitions, they're actually switching out the mesh. Now, with the object selected, you can actually see in the inspector the LOD group, and you can actually adjust the distance that the camera uses or sees each object. All you need to do is just drag with your left mouse button and make the adjustments until they suit your purposes. The nice thing about this system is that you can visually check it very easily. You just simply drag the zones around and then move the camera in and out and decide if it's what you want. If you click with the left mouse button on one of the zones in the inspector, you can actually access the mesh and delete it or replace it with a different mesh. You can also right-click on these zones and insert another LOD zone or delete the zone you just clicked on. The last thing we want to look at in the LOD group is the culled zone. Now that's the red zone on the far right. And when you cull something, it means it's no longer being rendered. So if we adjust this, we can actually make this object not be rendered when we reach the outer perimeter of this set. So I'll just try it here, and you can see now it's culled when we get to the very edge of this set. The reason to cull certain objects is if they're way off in the distance and they couldn't be seen anyway, you might as well remove it from the rendering cycle because it only makes your rendering faster. If you're new to LODs in general, or you're new to the LOD group script, you might want to go over to the Unity documentation site and just read through the very short chapter explaining LODs and the script and all the principles involved. It will really help you get a good understanding of the entire process. I promised that at the end of the video I would make a recommendation on software to make LODs. I should start by saying that most major 3D packages probably have some kind of tool to make LODs. But if you're looking for something that is incredibly simple to use and is probably fairly affordable for most people, then I'd have to say Polygon Cruncher by Moo Tools is the one I would go with. I've used it in the past for several jobs, and it's always delivered as promised. Now, everyone has their own opinion, so there might be another package that's better for you. All I can say is go to the site and download a trial and give it a try and see if the tool is something that you like. They have plugins for the major 3D packages, and they have a standalone version that'll run on its own. And that brings to an end this video and our quick introduction to LODs.